Hey there, I'm Sarah Zarella, a portrait and wedding photographer and your host for Wedding Secrets Unveiled. This is a podcast where we cut through the complexity of wedding planning, leaving you with everything you need to know directly from the industry experts. If you want to simplify your wedding planning while having fun, of course, you came to the right place. Join me while I guide you through your planning, starting from your engagement to your big day when you say, I do. After photographing for over 20 years, I am sharing with you tips and tricks to cut through the excess noise. Because I believe from the moment you said yes, your planning experience should be a magical time in your life. Here you'll find episodes that are fun, stress-free, and straight to the point with a fresh, honest take on the reality of what you really need to know about planning your perfect day. Let's dive in. Welcome back to Wedding Secrets Unveiled podcast, friends. I'm your host, Sarah Zarella, and today I'll be speaking with Sarah Narcus, who is the owner of Olio. It's a venue location in Peabody, Massachusetts. Today, Sarah and I are going to be talking about some really practical stuff when it comes to finding the perfect wedding venue for you. We are going to explore the questions that you should be asking on your venue site tours. We're also going to go over how to prepare for those site tours. We're even going to go over what to do and what not to do, along with how to evaluate if the venue is really right for you. So, listen. You're probably listening to this podcast because you just got engaged or you know someone who is getting married. So if you are in the planning process of setting your date and finding the venue, this is the episode for you. Well, welcome back to Wedding Secrets Unveiled podcast, friends. I'm excited to have our guest on today. We haven't done an episode like this before. So with that said, can you tell our listeners who you are, who you serve, and what you do in your business?
Hey, it's me. I'm Sarah too. So my name is Sarah Narcus, and I own two wedding businesses here in New England, just north of Boston. So I own a planning company called Without a Hitch, and I launched my very own venue just about 5 years ago called Olio. And we are located in Peabody, Massachusetts, so about 25 minutes north of Boston, I would say, in terms of who we serve. Our clients do come from all over the world, but the majority of our clients live or reside kind of like in the greater Boston area.
How does one open up a reception venue?
Oh, I could fill your ear with like so many places to start here, like right off the bat. But I would tell you that there's many ways to do it. But for me, my genesis started with my planning company. So back in 2013, I started Without a Hitch. And that business was a little side hustle for me in my 20s as my friends were getting married. And I started to kind of see a little niche where I could get in and start doing a lot of planning and coordination. I love that business. I'm still owning and operating it to this day. We're doing dozens of weddings each year all across New England. But what that business afforded me the opportunity to do was to work at venues all over New England. So I got my hand in tons of different spaces in the greater Boston area, all the way north to Maine and Vermont, all the way south to New York, and the chance to see how other venues operate. And in doing that, I really had the idea that there was a gap in the marketplace. And things have changed in the past few years. There's definitely some more venues popping up in the area that are serving this gap. But when I started this process of building my venue back in 2016, I really saw that there was nothing kind of serving this client who really wanted a really unique, flexible space where they could bring their own caterer, where they weren't right in Boston, but were very accessible to Boston and Logan and kind of everything that comes with being near the city. And that had a big enough capacity that they could actually have all their friends and family there. So that's what started me off kind of on the journey to say, hey, maybe I could do this. Now, I had no idea what I was in for over the upcoming years, but back in 2016, that's where I started.
I love it. And you know what? You're right. Because just like you being a planner, me being a photographer, I go to all different spaces and you see like the pros and the cons and the pain points. And then also too, like all the successful, varieties that are out there, and also too things that need to be worked on. Right. So, yeah. So here you are. All right. Well, then let's get right into it. Tell me what the first steps someone should take when they get engaged.
I love this question, Sarah, because I am often one of the very first calls people make when they get engaged, right? Like, hey, I have a ring on my finger. We're ready to start planning. Like, can I come see your venue? And I never want to turn anyone away. I'm always happy to give tours of my space. But I think there are actually some things that couples need to do before they step their foot in the door of a venue to actually evaluate whether it's a fit for them. So the very first thing I always say is like, actually enjoy it. Like, take a moment, like, yes, we did it. Like, let's celebrate in this. Let's tell our friends and family. And then you're going to sit down with your partner and have a powwow, right? Like a literal meeting, like what is important to us in this planning process. And when I have couples that come in that haven't done this step, I can see it as a professional vendor of over a decade. I can see it really clearly, right? Like you got one member of the partnership like over here thinking this is great, and the other one being like, well, I thought we weren't going to invite that side of the family, like kind of like this really large discrepancy. So make sure that you're starting off with your partner on the same page. What do you care about, right? I would say top 3 things that are really important to you, and maybe top 3 things that you really don't want at your wedding. What have you seen at other events that you want to like not have as part of your day, right? If you're on the same page with that, you might be almost ready to tour venues. I would say before you go and step foot in a venue, you also want to have a general sense of your guest count, right? So that is one of the biggest pieces of looking at spaces, particularly in New England. We are so fortunate to have incredible historic spaces in this part of the country, in this part of the world. And many of them are very small, right? So some great historic homes, some tents that are kind of set for a certain amount of people. If you know going into it what your general guest count will be, or at least maybe what your invite list looks like, that is going to really help define where you should go and look at venues and where you should step foot in. And then the very last piece that I would say like a must do before you go to start tour venues is you should have a general sense of budget. This is a tricky one because people think they want to spend one thing or they have no idea where to start. We just want to tour venues and then we'll figure out our budget. But I think that's a backwards approach because you're going to feel really caught off guard, perhaps, or frustrated in touring venues. The venue is not the one who's going to tell you what your total budget should be. You need to go in knowing what you're hoping to spend, and you shouldn't tour venues that are outside of your budget because it's going to set you up, you as the couple, up for disappointment. So if you've started off by kind of enjoying it and celebrating and getting your priorities straight, talking about your guest list and your budget, that's going to be a really good first step. And I would say, as a bonus piece of advice, I would advise couples to talk about when they think about what's important to them. Are you hiring a planner, right? This is kind of putting my planner hat on and like thinking about kind of when do we see the most success from an event perspective? If you know from the start that you don't have the capacity over the next 6, 8, 10, 12 months to take on the planning of an event of this scale, you should be bringing a planner in from the start. The planner loves to go and look at venues with you and help you decide on what you should spend and kind of where you should spend it. So if you know before you tour venues that you're going to have a planner, start there and then go to the venue step. That being said, when someone inquires with me and they're just ready to come tour, I'm going to welcome them into the venue. I'm going to educate them. I have a lot of resources on my website, on my social media, in my brain, right? I have a lot to share with clients, but I do think that the most successful couples who aren't going to feel like they're spinning their wheels, spending weekend after weekend doing tours, have done those steps.
That is a lot of great tips, right? So, I mean, good starting place. Okay, question though for you. And I know this is tapping in a little bit on your wedding planning side. And I know today's show, we really want to focus more on tips from a venue perspective. But you just said, your guest count, know roughly your guest count, right? And I assume you're saying that because you got to make sure you're touring a space that allows that. And a little bit about your budget. Can you just give a quick cliff notes of how somebody can even begin to understand what they can set aside for their budget?
Yeah, the biggest factor, you kind of hinted at it there, the biggest factor to budget is guest count, right? Those are intrinsically linked, okay? So because you're spending a price per head, a price per person on things like catering, there's not a set fee that you're spending like with a photographer, with a DJ, that does not vary depending on the number of guests. So if you can get your guest count within a range that you feel is reasonable, that is going to be the biggest factor to figuring out your budget. From there, hiring a planner. That would be really helpful to setting a budget because the planner is going to say, what's your dream? What's your vision? Oh, this is what you can expect to spend on that. But if the planner is not either in your cards or in your budget right off the start, I would say I would send you to my blog has a great budget worksheet for folks to look at. I would caution folks away from the big national websites that have budget workbooks. These are not applicable in New England. This is, in case you haven't, heard, this is one of the most expensive places to live and therefore one of the most expensive places in the country to get married. And so some of the averages that you see, all of the averages that you see on those sites are going to be somewhat misleading. My best back of the napkin advice, and some folks may have heard me share this before, but my best back of the napkin advice for how to calculate your budget is as follows. You want to start with the caterer. Okay. So if you understand generally what a price per head is, either at a venue like mine, which we can talk more about how I do that, or with an outside caterer, you're going to understand what the price per person is. Take that number, the price per person from the caterer, add that all up. So let's say you're talking about a $30,000 catering bill. That's food and beverage and bar and rentals, staffing, service, all the linens, everything. Take that number from the catering side and double it. That's a really good back of the napkin estimator for what your total all in budget would be for an event. And that's kind of like without going into, a $10,000 band or a $2,000 DJ, but just to give you a sense.
I agree with what you were saying about not using nationwide resources in regards to your budgeting. This is the exact reason why I started this show, because a lot of times there's information out there, but it's just too general. So for me, the reason why I started Wedding Secrets Unveiled was for that very reason. I mean, we are in New England. We are in the mecca of wedding planning, but we really need to hear it from the actual professionals themselves because, in theory, you have a lot of generalization, but when you actually talk to each professional and hear their point of view, it's just a wealth of knowledge. And that goes with, like you said, with budgeting. You can't look at something as, generalization. Different areas of the country have different budgeting and different price points. So thank you for just sharing those quick tips about your budget. But once the couple gets their budget, right, and they kind of figure out their guest list roughly, not the actual guest list, but how many people they think they need to invite and their budget. So now the phone rings and they're calling you up and they have this information, right? What are some questions that they can even start to begin to ask you or to even be able to evaluate the venue and if it's a right choice? Because the way I look at it is for the listeners here, some of these people just got engaged. I mean, this is a very overwhelming process and they're making their first calls.
Yeah, absolutely. And I am truly in the business of education, just like you doing this podcast. Like, I feel like I'm the front line for couples just engaged saying like, congratulations, but also, did you know X, Y, and Z? And that's a tough place to be sometimes. Sometimes you are bursting folks' bubbles, just to be honest. Like, you're kind of like, well, I know you were hoping for a Saturday for this fall, but those are all booked, right? So you kind of have to be in that position sometimes of sharing bad news, but it is a really special position I get to play, being the very first one to kind of help folks set their feet on the ground as they're starting to plan. So for me, a huge honor to be able to do that. And I would advise couples as you're starting to reach out to venues, first of all, I wouldn't reach out to 100 venues. So do some research online. Some of those big national websites, while they have really poor advice columns, have some really great aggregate tendencies to be able to kind of search through and find venues and see all information in one place about that venue, maybe the capacity, maybe the budget, maybe some great photos. I would look at all those venues' social media accounts. And that is what couples who are getting married now, between the ages of 25 and 35, which most of our clients are, that's what they're doing. They're checking social media. So you're going to scroll through. Does this look like a fit? Does it speak to you? Are they showing people in their feed who look like you, who act like you, right? Are you connected to this venue? And I would say beyond that, as you start to reach out, do you have my date available? If you are set on a specific date, it's your anniversary, you like the numerology, that's the only date where the sun and the moon and the stars align for you. You need to ask that before you go on a tour. I cannot tell you how many times, particularly as I was first starting and kind of like not get as familiar with what I needed to do to screen clients coming in the door, that people would come in. I'd be so excited to welcome them and show them around. And they're like, yeah, this is the one I want. I said, well, at my venue at Olio, we do one event per day. This is pretty typical for special, unique venues like mine, one per day. When it's booked, I can't offer it to you, right? So if you've traveled here to come and tour with me and you're set on a date, we've both wasted each other's time. So start with the date if that's important to you. And just as you said, that capacity piece, especially if you're over 100 people, which most weddings these days are, you're going to have fewer options. And you really want to make sure that the vision you have for a big dance floor, for a ceremony on site, for a giant, dessert buffet can fit with the number of guests that you're thinking. Use the maximum guest count that you may hit. Do not start to say, well, I'm inviting 200, but I'm going to plan and budget for 150. No, you really need to do that 200 number. Sure, everybody's not going to come, but if you end up at that number, you need to be able to fit in the space. So start there before the tour. I would also just generally advise couples to ask venues if they have any great resources to share before a tour, right? So at my venue, I share, like I said earlier, I share a budget guide. I share a guide all about our location. What is there to see and do in downtown Peabody, Massachusetts, right? I share information about parking and access and instructions. I share an awesome FAQ page. Venues should be sharing those in advance, again, so that going into it a lot of information. You're not going in completely blind into a tour.
Yes, and I'm happy that you actually mentioned again some of these nationwide resources because, like you said, we just said what they're not good at, but what they really are good at is giving you almost like, for lack of better terms, a directory. So you can really go on there and you can really see what's out there. So for example, what I'm saying is, a lot of times when you get engaged, you'll always will have your friends or your family members that might have some referrals or whatnot, or people, meaning vendors, and venues you may have been to a guest at. So there's always going to be those names of places or vendors that you know about, right? But going to these nationwide directories, you can start to really see some other options that you may have never even known. And like you said, you're starting to do visuals and seeing if it speaks to you. Because I got a question for you. How many places do you think is the most successful amount to reach out to? There's always, in every industry, there's a sweet spot, right? So how many venues do you feel that a couple really should reach out to where it's not too much that they're getting overwhelmed, but it's not too little that they getting a little bit lost and feeling like they may have captured everything that they wanted?
Yeah, great question. Couples should tour 3 to 5 venues. Okay. That is really ideal. And it's probably pretty consistent. Again, going back to my decade of experience doing this in Boston, it's probably pretty consistent across vendors. You're going to interview 3 to 5 planners. You're going to talk to 3 to 5 photographers. That's kind of what the sweet spot for the number. But in general, to set up 3 or 4 or 5 tours of venues, you're probably going to reach out to 10, 15, maybe 20. You're going to see who gets back to you. Are you happy with the way they replied? Did they spell your name correctly? Did they congratulate you? Were they excited to invite you in? Do they even have tours available over the next upcoming weeks when you want to be doing tours? So you're probably going to spread your net a little bit wider at first to go look at venues, but try to schedule your visits for 3 to 5. Try to schedule them, if not consecutively, pretty close together. The biggest challenge I see from couples is I'm often the very first tour, which I feel so honored to be. Like, couples have prioritized coming to see me. I have prioritized making space on my calendar for those couples to come and see me. And then they have some on the list, just like you said, that they feel like they have to go see. Like, I got to go to, mom wants me to see this one. I had a great event at this one. I have to go see it. And the next tour is not available for 6 weeks. It's like, well, you're not going to have the date that you wanted available on my calendar, right, at my venue. If you go and you kind of are waiting for that other tour, you start to get confused, frankly. When I see couples who are touring 7, 8, 9, 10 plus venues, you're like, wait, were you the one that had, right? Was what did you say was your policy about dogs, right? It's like, well, actually, my policy about dogs is right on my website, but it can be really confusing. And now you've got a spreadsheet, right, with all 15 of your venues and every column for everything that's important to you. And I think it can become a bit muddled. If you feel as a couple that you're in that place, go and hire a planner, at least a small contract with a planner who can just help you evaluate venues, because it is confusing. And that's one thing as a venue owner that I kind of I do kind of chuckle a little bit about it, because when couples come in, I always ask them where else they're touring. I don't know if that's a weird question. Like, to be honest, I always ask couples, where else are you touring? And the reason I ask that is because I've worked at a lot of places. So I love to hear from them where else they're touring, because I might be able to sell against that, right? I might be able to offer kind of what we have that they don't have. Or frankly, I might see a client and be like, you know what, you should go have that restaurant wedding. Like, that's perfect for you. Like, that's a better fit than what we do. So I'm always asking where else they're touring. And when they are touring places that are so different from each other, you're touring a ballroom, you're touring a barn, you're touring a loft, and you're touring a tent, like, what's your vibe? Like, you looking at winter? You looking at something? Like, what do you want? That may really necessitate a planner coming and helping you to kind of narrow your options. So I would go back to that advice.
And that actually opens up to my next question is I really would love for you to break it down to our listeners, the difference between a venue, a planner, and a coordinator, because there's definitely different roles that these professionals fill and play.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And this was something I came up against definitely when I was have been running my planning company for the last decade, is sometimes I'll hear clients say like, well, my venue says they have a planner. My venue says they have somebody on site who does day of coordination. And my response to that is always like, that's terrific. Like, that's awesome. Every single venue has somebody who's on site. There's no venue, unless it's maybe somebody's, your cousin's backyard, right? That's just going to be there for you with like the doors wide open. Somebody's got to be there. The extent to the services to which that venue provides will vary greatly depending on the venue. And that's a great question to ask on your tour, or if you love the venue, in your subsequent follow-up with the venue, like, hey, what are you providing on site on the day of the wedding or in advance, and try to understand more about their scope. However, no matter what, the venue is not acting as an independent wedding planner. And I think that's a really important point for couples to hear and really internalize. So I'm just going to say it again. The venue is not acting as an independent wedding planner. And what that means is like the venue is going to make decisions or make recommendations that are in the best interest of the venue. That's not always a bad thing, right? I don't think they're out to get you. But they may have always seen people do this certain layout, or they may recommend this, this vendor because this is who always installs these lights in this space. When you bring in an outside planner, that person works on your behalf. They're going to work with the venue, the planner, the coordinator, the staff from the venue, but they are going to work for you as the client. And that is what every couple truly deserves on their wedding day, is someone who represents them and has their interests in mind, who understands their priorities inside and out, who isn't doing hundreds of events per year the way that venues are. And kind of, I'm not saying we're churning them out, but as a venue, that is your job, is to do it on Friday, do it again on Saturday, and do it again on Sunday. Our job as a venue is to turn to the planner and say, hey, the ceremony ran a little bit long. Do you want to extend cocktail hour, or do you want to cut cocktail hour short to keep dinner at the time that it was, right? And that's the job of the planner, to know what's important to the client. Either of those options are a good answer, but only the planner can know what was the priority of the couple. So that was kind of a long way of answering your question, which is like, those are different roles. A planner works for you. The venue coordinator, planner, like the venue staff, work for the venue and have their interests in mind.
I love it. And what we're going to do is let's take a quick break. And when we get back, let's now get into a little bit about how to prepare for a site visit. I appreciate you being here. And hey, if you like what you're hearing, I encourage you to check out our website at sarahzarella.com. And don't forget, you can actually subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening so you never miss an episode. And I would so appreciate if you left a fabulous review on Apple Podcast. Even better, share it with a friend. It's a great way to show your support. And now, let's get back to the episode. Well, welcome back to Wedding Secrets Unveiled podcast, friends. So before the break, I was talking with Sarah about what questions you should be asking yourself in regards to what venues you want to tour at. But now let's figure out the questions you should be asking venues when you do go and tour, and also how you should prepare for that. So with that said, Sarah, how should someone prepare for their site visit?
Absolutely. Yeah. So when you know you're coming into tour, maybe that tour is scheduled a week or two out, you're looking forward to it. I would start by following that venue on their socials so you can see kind of what they're posting, what they're up to, see if they have any great resources that they shared that said, please review this in advance of our tour. I would say the majority of venues are doing that these days. So please take the time to review those because again, if you go through it and you see a non-negotiable in there, like we don't allow live flame, we don't allow dogs, and that was a big part of you and your partner's like must-haves, you can cancel the tour. You can save everyone's time, and you can focus your endeavors elsewhere. So read those resources that are shared in advance. And I would absolutely suggest making a list of questions that you want to ask on the tour itself, which I think we should talk about soon. But I do think going into the venue tour, I see so many couples pull up their phones or take out a literal notebook and go through the questions that they have, many of which we're going to cover already in the course of the tour. But at the end of the tour, I'm always turning to couples. Anything else that I can answer for you? If you have some questions that you've pre-prepared, that's really helpful for you so you don't feel like you missed an opportunity.
So what are some questions that they should prepare?
I think we talked about the capacity. That's my number one. Like, what do you hold? How does this room get laid out? Help me to envision, right? So when you come to Tour Olio, it's a completely big empty room. So I bought this old building. It's a big loft space. It's a very large space, and we leave it empty because at my venue specifically, the caterer is the one who sets up all the tables and chairs. So when there's no catering on site, the room is completely empty, right? And so my job as a venue owner and kind of selling the space is to walk around with the client and say, just picture your DJ goes over here, your sweetheart table goes over here, right? I'm helping them to envision. So understanding not only what the number capacity is of the space, but you should be prepared to ask the venue, where does everything go? How does this room get laid out, right? And along with that, you should absolutely be prepared to ask budget questions you may have. Hopefully, going into it generally what you can expect to spend. Venues should be sharing that in advance. For me, that's a non-negotiable. My prices for Olio are right on the website. They are public knowledge, and so that folks know when they're coming in what they can expect to spend with me, right? But knowing what's included, is this furniture included? Is that venue service included? Are there any upsells or add-ons that can be added? That's a great question. I would say in general, in New England, I have to ask you to ask the question about weather. Have you looked outside recently? Like, is it snowing? Is it raining? We don't know. You need to understand what the contingency plan is in the case of inclement weather, be that extreme heat, extreme cold, rain, wind, fire, anything that may occur in New England, because it does, right? So understand what your options are. And I would absolutely suggest couples ask to see the indoor or the inclement weather plan on their tour, right? If that is not a plan that you love in New England, I would not choose that venue, frankly, because it's just very likely to happen. If it doesn't, congrats, you got a beautiful sunny day, but you have to love your indoor plan, right? Other pieces of things I would kind of ask, kind of less essential for the actual tour itself, but just keep these in mind as you are touring venues. What's their policy about vendors, right? Do they have an open vendor policy? Do they have a list of preferred vendors? Or do they have like a list of 3 DJs and these are the only 3 that are approved to work within the noise ordinances of this small town, and you must choose from one of these 3? That may or may not be a deal breaker for you. At Olio, couples tend to choose my space because they love the flexibility of choosing who they work with. But there are other couples who really want to work within the parameters that a venue has and just work with the DJ that is their on-site vendor, right? So you're going to decide what's important to you and ask about that vendor policy when you are touring. I would also recommend asking about insurance. This isn't like the most glamorous topic, but I actually do get asked this quite a bit. And I'm always very impressed when couples ask this because maybe they've read my tips and tricks or somebody else is out there, which is understanding what insurance policies are required. This could be an added expense for you. So you want to understand what you have to purchase and or what you are being recommended to purchase. And I'll tell you in brief that most venues, including mine, recommend that couples consider purchasing a cancellation policy. That's one type of insurance policy. And the second type of policy is liability policy. So some venues require those and some recommend them. I would also definitely suggest asking about hours and noise restrictions. It is small town New England, so there are a lot of noise ordinances taking place on a town by town basis, particularly if you're looking at a tented wedding, a backyard wedding, anything outdoors is going to have a lot more restrictions attached to it in regards to noise. So if for you culturally or just your preference is to party till 1 a.m, that is going to be a really important question to ask, on or before the tour, as opposed to there are many venues out there that limit noise to 10 or 11 p.m. We're at midnight on the weekend. So you kind of decide what's important to you for that noise ordinance piece. Okay. Other questions, I would definitely ask anything about permits. This isn't applicable to most established venues. You're not going to be required to pull permits, but sometimes I have couples come in, like let's say we're doing a big Indian wedding that might require an open flame on site. There is a special permit process required on a city by city basis to pull that open flame permit. And for couples who need that permit, it's important to know upfront what the process is if that is allowed. And on that topic, I would say the other big piece to ask is just, are we allowed to do X, Y, or Z? So if there's something that you saw, a sparkler exit, bringing your dog, hanging a disco ball, whatever those things might be, you should ask those on the tour. And if you don't know upfront, you can definitely ask them by email later, but you don't want to go ahead and book a venue and then find out later, like, oh, one of these things that you really wanted to do is just not allowed at this venue.
And, I was chuckling to myself when you were bringing up the insurance because I was actually going to ask you that next because it's not a very sexy topic, right? But kind of touching upon the insurance question, definitely the other thing you want to ask is what you expect from your vendors, because a lot of vendors, believe it or not, especially these part-time vendors, they don't have insurance, and a lot of venues want their certificate of insurance. So just something to add on the list of questions about what you expect from your vendors. Well, with that said, it's time for our wrap-up question. What are some key points that couples should be asking the venues to make sure that they are inquiring with a professional company to ensure that their wedding day is an absolute perfect event?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we talked about capacity and budget, date availability, and beyond that, just understanding what is allowed, what is recommended, and kind of asking that venue for a lot of examples, photos or layouts, stories about what other couples have done. Does that jive with you? Does it a fit for what you love to do? And one more thing, I think it's really important to understand what the venue commitment is to you throughout your planning process. Are they leading you every step of the way? Are they providing the resources that you feel you might need? Are they suggesting, as I did, that you hire a planner? Above and beyond that, this is a relationship you're now going to have with someone for an extended period of time. We at Olio have bookings on the calendar through the end of 2026. So these are folks I'm working with for the course of years of their life. You should make sure that your venue is someone you want to work with, that you want to support, that you want to partner with.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this week's episode of Wedding Secrets Unveiled. You helped our listeners become one step closer to their journey of stress-free wedding planning. Can you tell everybody where they could find you?
I would love to. Thank you, Sarah. So I would love for everyone to hop on and follow me at Olio Peabody. So if you go on Instagram or Pinterest or LinkedIn or Facebook or any number of sites, you can find me. I am on TikTok. Yes, you can find me at Olio Peabody. So you're going to see a lot of behind the scenes of what it is like to own and operate and run a venue from day to day beyond just weddings. We do a lot more than that at Olio. And for a little more behind the scenes on what it's like to be a wedding planner and to kind of live that life, I'm on Instagram at Without a Hitch. So that's my planning business, and I'd love to see everyone there.
Awesome. And for our listeners, we will have Sarah's information on our episode show notes, which you can find on our blog and also on our website page at sarahzarella.com/podcast. Thank you for listening to Wedding Secrets Unveiled. I appreciate you being here. And hey, if you enjoyed this episode, I want to tell you something. I encourage you to check out our website at sarahzarella.com. We love photographing while having fun, of course. Check out our podcast page on our website for our show notes along with upcoming episodes with your local wedding experts. Listen in as we help you plan your epic event. And don't forget that you can actually subscribe to this podcast wherever you are listening so you never miss an episode. I would so appreciate if you left a review for us on Apple Podcasts. Even better, share it with a friend. It's a great way to show your support and let us know what you think. If you know any wedding experts that would like to be a guest, we have a link directly on our website where they can let us know. Thank you for listening.